Good morning, everyone. We all go? Yes. It's nice to be here. There we go. I can hear things now. And great to come back to Toowoomba. Actually, when I was just a couple of weeks ago going through my computer, I change computers every now and again, but you know when you've got something on the cloud, it's there. And if you do a search, you can always find it. And so I did a search of Toowoomba church services. And lo and behold, I come up with the last church service I spoke to you about here. But it was so long ago, I look totally different. Mind you, none of you have changed, but boy, do I look different. So it's great to be back. I've got to say though, full marks to David for bulldog tenacity. How many years have you been trying to get me back here, David? A long time. And I have found excuse after excuse. I ran out. And so I just had to give up. So it's great to be back with you, and thank you very much for inviting me back, David. And to all you people sitting on your lounge at home, stay comfortable. Got the cuppa sitting by you down there on the lounge chair. Well, think of us. We're doing it tough here in church. We haven't got our cuppa, but we'll get there. Now, I've got a story for the children, and I've got a couple of young children and quite a few older children. Some of those older children, I reckon, are pushing pension age. So, because I can't all get you here in one spot, it was funny. I had to take a children's story at another church just a while back. And I said, I need an audience if I'm going to do a kid's story. Have I got an audience? And they said, yes, we've got kids coming. I said, fantastic, I need an audience. And this was on Monday. Come Wednesday, boom, we were in lockdown again. No audience. How do you tell a kid's story without having any kids? So here I go. I goes along to church, sit in front of the camera on the lounge, and pulled out my own audience. I had Teddy Bear and Molly Dolly. And they sat next to me and I told them the story. And they knew all the answers to all the questions I asked. Fantastic. Anyway, this is so different to school, because today I want you to forget everything you learned in school and you're allowed to call out. All right? Calling out is good. Quiet is bad. Okay? What's coming up in a couple of weeks' time? Or maybe it's only a week's time. Holidays, school holidays. And not just any school holidays. They are September school holidays. Now, when I grew up as a kid, September school holidays were always the best, apart from Christmas and May and the other ones. But September school holidays was fantastic, because I always went to my grandma and grandpa's place for September school holidays. Now, come to think of it, I used to go there for May too, and I think I was there for Christmas. Maybe my mum and dad were trying to give me a message, were they? Anyway, I used to go along to grandpa and grandma's place in September school holidays, and it was fantastic. I want to tell you a story about Jimmy, who spends his school holidays with Grandma and Grandpa. Okay? Grandpa is Grandpa Jack. Okay? So Grandma and Grandpa Jack just live out of town a little bit. Jimmy goes along and he's staying with them for over the September holidays. Now, Grandma and Jack, we're just going to go along. Here he is. See Grandpa Jack there? Grandpa Jack had a really interesting hobby. What do you reckon it was? Not just any sort of car. Do you know what sort of car that is? Exactly, a Model T Ford. Yeah, Grandpa Jack used to restore Model T Fords. And there he is with his Model T Ford. And how would you be if he was your grandpa? Wouldn't that be cool? Because going to stay at Grandpa's house to go for a ride in the Model T Ford, it would be fantastic. And so one day in the middle of the holidays, Grandpa says to Jimmy, Jimmy, the sun is shining, there's no wind, it's a beautiful day out. Why don't we go for a ride in the Model T? And so they jumps into the Model T and they heads out, put, out onto the road, and they go, it's beautiful, just putting along because you can still hear the birds, you can see all the cows in the paddock, it's wonderful. Until all of a sudden, and the Model T come to a stop. Over to the side of the road, pull her up. Grandpa Jack gets out, lifts the bonnet, can't see anything wrong, don't know what to do, so they're standing there on the side of the road. When it wasn't long when Todd Hayes came up. Now, Todd Hayes had one of these, a V8 Holden Ute. Now, V8 Holden Utes are pretty powerful, all right? And Todd Hayes was known around town as driving a bit too fast. But he was a really nice lad. And he pulls up and he says, Grandpa Jack, what's the matter? What's happened here? And Grandpa Jack says, it's my Model T has spluttered to a stop. Now, Todd knew a little bit about cars, but he knew nothing about Model T Fords. So he said, it's not far into the service station in town. Why don't I just put a rope on the front and I'll very carefully, very gently just pull you into town. And then I'll leave you at the service station and they might be able to help you out. Well, Grandpa Jack thought that was a wonderful idea. And Jimmy, he thought that was pretty good too. He'd be sitting in the car going along behind Todd's big V8 ute. That would be pretty cool, wouldn't it? So they collect it up, they tie the rope on, they put it on the tow bar of the ute, and just before they pulled out, Grandpa Jack runs up and he knocks on the window and he says, Todd, now look, I can't go very fast, so if you feel you're going a bit fast, I'm going to just honk on my horn, honk, 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 and that means slow down. All right? So Todd, they all get in the car, Todd pulls out and he's 5 kilometres an hour, 10 kilometres an hour, 15, everything's going fine. Grandpa Jack's sitting there and Jimmy's enjoying the ride. And very quiet when you're being towed, you can't hear any sound and it's all going good. Then Todd looks in the mirror of his red V8 Holden ute and sees this. Todd's brother Rick has a Falcon V8 ute. Now, everyone knows that red Holden V8 utes go much faster than blue Falcon V8 utes. Everyone knows that. Well, everyone had appeared except for Rick. And so when Rick is coming up behind Todd, Todd looks in the mirror and Rick's going a bit fast, and so Todd has never in his life allowed Rick to pass him in that blue Ford ute. And so when Todd looks in that mirror and he sees Rick coming up the side, what do you think Todd did? Oh, you know the story. Oh, you know this. He put his foot down. Oh, excuse me. He put his foot down and away went that red V8 ute, and Todd saw what was happening with Rick, and Rick put his foot down too, and down the road they went. And there was a blue Ford V8 ute and a red Holden V8 ute, and they were going way too fast down the road, side by side. But what was behind the red Holden ute? Honk, 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 honk. Grandpa honking his horn because they were going way too fast now, being pulled along behind Todd. Well, the story doesn't stop there, because coming the other way was Farmer Sid. Farmer Sid was in his truck getting some hay to take back to the farm. And as he's driving down the road, he's going in the opposite direction, coming straight for Todd and Rick. And he looks up the road, and all he sees is a blue ute and a red ute coming straight for him. And he says, "Those jolly hay boys again." And you know what he had to do? He had to pull off the side of the road because they were coming straight down the road at him. He got his phone and he rang up and he called Sergeant Smith. He said, "Sergeant Smith, put up a roadblock. Quick, those jolly Hayes boys are racing down the public roads and they're going flat out." But he says, "That's not the worst of it. There's Grandpa Jack sitting in his T-model Ford bipping to pass." Well, I don't know that Sergeant Smith believed him. I think he thought Farmer Sid might have been a little bit exaggerating. There was a guy called Plato, and he lived something like 300 years before Jesus, 350 years before Jesus, and he wrote a poem. And this is what the poem, this is just a word from the poem. "Things are not always as they seem. The first appearances may be deceiving." Now, do you think Farmer Sid fell into that situation? Things were not always as they seem? I am sure Grandpa Jack wasn't trying to pass. So Plato was a pretty wise guy, but there was somebody else too that wrote something down. And this, we find this in Genesis. Genesis chapter 3. "Now the serpent was more crafty than any other beast in the field that the Lord God had made. And he said to the woman," what was the name of the woman? He said to the woman, "Did God actually say you should not eat of any tree in the garden? Things may not always be what they seem." So when you see something for the first time and we jump to conclusions, it's not always the truth, is it? Thank you for listening so well. I feel like I've had enough now. I'll go and sit down and let somebody else speak. But I can't because the program's got my name on it for the next thing too. Thank you so much. Can I ask you just to bow your heads in prayer before we move into our talk this morning? Lord, as we open your word, we ask so much that your Spirit will be with us, that you'll guide our mind, that you'll guide our understanding, and you'll help us to be able to express our love and care for you in ways that we did not think possible. In your name, amen. The title for my sermon this morning, and we just need to bring up a black page here. I'll just keep talking for a little bit. Here we go. No, we're good. Here it is. We're there. Isn't technology marvellous? I just say things and they just happen like that. Google. Donald. My title of the sermon this morning is "Uneasy Lies the Head That Wears a Crown." It's been borrowed from Shakespeare. It's not an original one. And it's from Henry IV. The quote, it comes from the king himself. Henry IV was assisted by the Percy family, or the Earl of Northumberland, to overthrow King Richard II and to take the throne and become king. All is not well, however, as he is having a little bit of trouble. He's got Scotland to the north of England that are trying to come down and rebel. He's got Wales over to the west. And he's got the real successor, the real person that should be king, Edmund Mortimer, the Earl of March, all hassling him. Now, the Percy family The Percy family are angry because Henry, and here's Henry standing here with his son. Henry has dismissed them, and they feel that the wealth that they were entitled to for helping Henry become king has been denied them. And so they're a little bit upset. As a result of this, Henry Percy, the son of the Earl of Northumberland, and we'll use his nickname. Shakespeare gives him a nickname, Hotspur. Hotspur starts to get all these other groups together to lead a rebellion. The Scots, the Welsh, the Prince Edmund. And so Hotspur gets these people together, these groups together, and they try to get back the crown and overthrow Henry IV. Henry IV's son is called Harry, Prince of Wales. Interesting. But his nickname Hal. And Hal was having a pretty good time around London. In fact, wine, women and song had a pretty big meaning for Hal, because that was the way he spent most of his time. Any of you sort of remember Henry IV from school or anything like that? Because if you do, I'm happy to share with you the story and you can take on bits. We're not going to be much longer, but I want to get to this point here. So, in fact, Hal was playing up so much that the local nobles sort of, they cast scorn upon him and thought he was a no good layabout. Finally, he comes to his senses and realises Dad, the king, is in big trouble, and so he goes to Dad's help. Now, King Henry IV has received news, and Hal tells him the news, you can see it there, that Hotspur is dead. The rebel army is in total disarray. The king, although he's happy about this, his health is failing. He cannot sleep at night worrying about what's going on. In spite of his great wealth that he has, he sees people living in squalor. He's supposed to be the king that helps them in this situation. And he's worried about it. But probably more than that, and Shakespeare takes an interesting turn here, he gets a moment of conscience where his conscience worries him, because exactly what Hotspur was trying to do is what he himself did to King Richard II. It's interesting, people still have consciences even though they go to some levels like this. And so, with the country in disarray, with civil war shattered the country, King Henry, unable to sleep, he says to his son, "Uneasy lies the head that wears a crown." And I felt that fitted well with the thoughts I just want to share with you today. To get focus on today's discussion, we've got to go way back in history, way back before the 1400s of King Henry IV. In fact, we go back almost 2,500 years before that, to 1000 BC. The setting is the promised land of Israel. The story is about the end of one form of government, a style that the people had had as their government, and a change to a new form of government. The main characters of the story. Well, we've got a prophet, a high priest. We've got a farmer who became a soldier and who ended up as a king. And of course, you can't have a good story without a villain. So we've got a villain. You may have already worked out who we're talking about. I'm sure you have heard this story and you know it. It's one of the Bible stories that we tell because the plot is so intriguing. It's about divine leading. It's about bravery. It's about jealousy. It's about ambition. It's about young, humble people becoming into positions of power and great glory. It's about tribulation and warfare. It's about civil war. It's about good and evil. It's about it's got the whole lot. Shakespeare would have loved it. But it's important to put some of the background details to this story, because I want to demonstrate to you that God is in command no matter what we feel is best for us. It's pretty hard to discourage God from looking after and protecting us, even when we do some pretty dumb things. And no matter how miserable and despicable our actions, God is always waiting to have us back if we just ask. So as we unpack this presentation this morning, I want you to see these things come through. The introduction of our story commences in 1 Samuel chapter 12. The first noteworthy person is Samuel. Samuel is the leader of the 12 tribes of Israel. The leadership model is a judge, and not just a judge, but a religious judge, a prophet. And that's why I entitled her book, The Prophet and Judges, because that's what it was. That was their style of governance. That was their style of leadership. And it had existed for some 400 years. But the people were asking for a change. Samuel was the last of these judges. Now, he didn't plan it that way because he actually had 2 sons, and he wanted those to continue on the lineage. And as I was thinking about religious leaders being the leader of the country, I thought, well, that's pretty old-fashioned. But there are some countries even today that still have that. And I was thinking, probably the most infamous one of these is Ayatollah help me out. Ayatollah Khamenei. Okay, there's a religious leader that was ruling the country. And we still have him in the Middle East. Now, it appears that there are several judges around at the time, not just Samuel. Because you've got the 12 tribes of Israel, and one man can't judge everything that goes wrong in the 12 tribes of Israel. So there was several of these. So he was a judge, he was a prophet, he was a teacher, but he was also a general in the army, because under him, the Israelites did win some battles against the tribes, the other tribes that were around them. Now there appeared, I just want to share with you this particular judge, because this one stands out as a little bit different. This is, now I could say Deborah or Deborah. How do you say it? Deborah? Deborah reigned as the governor or the leader for some 40 years. And she was a prophetess and a judge. And in Judges 4, chapter 4, the verse that you can see there says, now Deborah, a prophet, the wife of Lapidoth, was leading Israel at that time. She held court under a palm tree, the palm of Deborah, between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim. And the Israelites went up to her to have their disputes decided. Not only was she someone who made judgment, but she was also the leader of the army in that area. Because look at the next verse. She sent Barak, son of Abinoam, from Kadesh in Naphtali, and said to him, the Lord, the God of Israel, commands you, go take with you 10,000 men from Naphtali and Zebulun, and lead them up to Mount Tabor, and I will lead Sisera, the commander of Jabin's army, with his chariots and his troops to the Kishon River and give him into your hands. Now, you know the story of Sisera. You've probably that's for another time, isn't it? But what we have here is the Lord will trick Sisera into coming out and fight the forces that Deborah are leading. And there'll be a battle. And they already know the outcome of the battle, because she says, I will give him into your hands, to her general. And so in verse 9 we see Deborah going with Barak into battle. From this period, we now move into a new phase of government. The second and crucial category of leadership is about to emerge, and that is a king, a monarchy. This kind of government was somewhat foreign to the Israelites. The Philistines continued to oppose Israel, though through Samuel's leadership, he had pushed them back and held them back. But they wanted someone to be a bit more of it's a bit more like the other tribes around them. They wanted a king. And while this wasn't God's plan, he did talk about it. Now, it's interesting when you go back to Deuteronomy chapter 17. And I haven't got this coming up, but I do want to share it with you. Well, actually, let's have a look at this, because this relates to it. Unlike the Egyptian kings, the Israelite king was expected to know and apply the laws of the Torah. Not to become the law itself, to be absolute ruler himself. In fact, because of the potential power of this king, God did not even allow the children of Israel to elect their king. He wanted to choose him. And this here, God's command about the king, is interesting, because God tells Moses these commands 400 years before we come to this point in time where Samuel is about to be the last prophet and the last leader, the last judge. So God knows what's happening 400 years ahead of when it happens. And God tells Moses this: he shall not multiply horses for himself, neither shall he multiply wives for himself. Well, if he can't have horses, surely he couldn't have wives. Nor shall he greatly multiply silver and gold for himself, lest his heart turn away. And you can read the rest. So what God is saying, okay, I know that in 400 years' time, or thereabouts, these children of Israel are going to come and say, we want a different kind of government. And I am setting things up now for that to occur. The die is cast. Samuel is commissioned by God to appoint his successor. He couldn't appoint either of his boys because they were taking bribes and they were doing some pretty weird stuff. No one wanted them to be king. And so we know the story where he goes out and he finds someone to anoint as king, led by God. 1 Samuel 9, verse 1, we've got on the board there, on the screen. There was a Benjamite, a man of standing, whose name was Kish, son of Abiel. Kish had a son named Saul, as handsome a young man as could be found anywhere in Israel. And he was a head taller than anybody else. So Samuel is instructed by God to anoint Saul as the first king of Israel. Now, Israel, remember, is a common noun referring to 12 different tribes, 12 different groups of people. Some of these tribes are very big and some of them are small. But when you put them all together, you've got the Confederation of Israel. It's a bit like, you remember USSR? United Soviet Socialized Republic? We just used to call it Russia, but that was wrong. Because USSR was a whole heap of countries that had all come together under the United Soviet, So it was a group. And so Israel's a bit like that. There's all these tribes out there, all doing their own thing, but really they are the children of Israel. And now they have a king appointed to be the king of the 12 tribes. Now, Saul's father, Kish, is a wealthy man. He has a lot of influence. People respect him. He comes from the town of Gibeah, from the tribe of Benjamin. And so Saul is born into wealth. He's got money. He's got influence, well, his dad has influence. Now, Gibeah is in the Central Highlands, approximately 5 kilometres north of Jerusalem. See if we got a map here to give us a bit of an idea. All right, so you can see all the various tribes and where they were spread all around the place. Okay? And see that little blue one in the middle? Benjamin. The tribe of Benjamin is described as the least of the 12 tribes. So Samuel is a little bit surprised that God is saying that from the least of the 12 tribes, I'm going to choose this King Saul. Because if you think of a king, he needs a lot of support from a lot of people. And if you're choosing one from some other tribe, well, are the 11 other tribes going to automatically support that person? Well, why couldn't someone from our tribe be king? So not everyone was in favour of all this. Judges chapter 19 gives us a bit of insight into this. Gibeah is in the land of Benjamin and was the site of the first civil war that happened in Israel, where the tribe of Benjamin was in a battle with the other tribes of Israel. Now, this whole thing occurred about 200 years before Saul. So Saul had nothing to do with this. But this is the story, and I'm only going to touch on it because it's pretty gruesome, all right? It occurred that a Levite and his wife, it's actually his second wife, could be called a concubine, were travelling from Bethlehem back to their home, and they stayed overnight in Gibeah. And during the night, a mob came to where they were staying. They take the wife away, they beat her, they rape her, and they bring her back and leave her on the front door dead. What a terrible thing to have happen. In the morning, the Levite is out looking for her, and he opens the front door, and there she is, laying there, dead. So he puts her on a donkey, and he travels home. And one would think he's taking his wife home to give her a burial. He gets home, and this is where it gets really gruesome. He cuts her up into 12 pieces. And he sends people out to the tribes all around and said, I want justice for what the people of Benjamin did to my wife. And the other tribes were so outraged that someone in Benjamin, the tribe of Benjamin, killed the Levite's wife and raped her, that they called together an army to go and attack Benjamin, the tribe of Benjamin, to find these men so that they could give them justice. And justice was execution. 400,000 Confederate soldiers came together from all these other tribes after they received in their tribe, part of the Levite's wife. And they came in, they were so angry. They came to the tribal leaders of Benjamin and they said, "Give us the man that did this. They deserve to die." And the leaders of the tribe of Benjamin said, "We're not going to do it. You've got to look at our army." "No, we're not going to do it." So the tribe of Benjamin got together all their people too, but I had an army. But how many did we say was over here in the Federation? 400,000. Benjamin got together 26,000. So you know what the outcome's going to be, don't you? You put 26 against 400. It's not a good story. And because they wouldn't surrender the men, the 400,000 came in and they basically wiped out the tribe of Benjamin. Commentators say that when this civil war was finished, there were 600 men left in Benjamin. Just of 26,000 men that started the war, there was women and there was children and there was all sorts of other people there. A whole tribal area, a whole state, 600 men left and some women and children. In fact, the story goes on to say that when all this had happened and the desolation was so bad that all the other places out there, and from the map, it's not there anymore, they came back into Benjamin and helped rebuild the town and the cities. And they actually brought women from other places in to be wives for the men that were still there so that they could repopulate. We move on 200 years from there, and here we have Kish and his son Saul, and Saul is now the king of all of those tribes. Wow, how's that for a turnaround of the books? So you can see why Samuel was a little bit surprised that God chose Saul to be the king with a history like that. And I guess it's not surprising that there are a few people who did not agree that Saul should be king. Now, we've got to remember that the Israelites came from the land of Egypt. And when they crossed the Jordan to enter the promised land, they were the invaders. They were the ones coming in to conquer a land where somebody else lived. And there were lots of other people there. You remember the Battle of Jericho, their first big battle? They came in to take down the city of Jericho because they wanted to be the people who inhabited the land of Israel, because it had grapes this big and bananas so long you couldn't lift them. Goodness knows how big the watermelons were. But everything was so good, and they wanted to be there and they wanted to take it over. But they were the invaders. Now they'd had some scraps along the way. They had some battles coming up. You remember who was the leader of the army of the children of Israel out in the desert? What was his name? You got Moses, and you got Aaron, you got Miriam, and you got Joshua, right? And there were some skirmishes along the way. And Joshua, from time to time, he had to sort some of these out. And the Amalekites were probably the worst, because they used to come out of the desert and raid the Israelites. I mean, you've had a whole heap of people. You've got 1 million people camped in the middle of the desert, and you're a tribal leader. Then you go over the hill and say, "Wow, guys, look what's over here. Let's go and raid, see what we can get off of these lot." And so there'd be a raid, and Joshua had to come out and he'd sort them out. And there was quite a big battle near Mount Sinai. It's recorded there. So they had all these things going on. And now the children of Israel are the captors. They're the ones coming in to take over the land where the Canaanites lived, and the Moabites lived, and the Edomites lived, and the Amalekites lived, and the Armenians lived, and that big group right over on the coast. See it there? The Philistines, where the Philistines lived. And so these guys already there didn't take too kindly to this new group of people coming in to take all their land, all their farms, all their animals, kill people, push them off, and make those that they didn't kill slaves. Didn't seem very fair, does it? But that's what God had instructed them to do. And so you have all these battles going on. Now, there's a very important part of Israel, of this whole country, and it's called the Valley of Jezreel. And there were lots of battles over the Valley of Jezreel. There's a passageway called the Via Maria. So it's probably Maris, Via Maris, which is Latin for the way of the sea. And what that meant was, and this is the Via Maris you can see there. The top picture there shows the old ancient roads and some of the road markers. Down the bottom, there's cars going along the highway, and the Via Marias is still there today. And if you are travelling from Egypt and you want to go to the old Babylon or anywhere over there near the Tigris-Euphrates River, the only real way to go without climbing mountains was to go through the Valley of Jezreel and along the Via Marias. It was the transport route for all the traffic going from Egypt to the wealthy, wealthy, wealthy lands of where Babylon was, and all that area around the Tigris-Euphrates. And if you held that road, that passageway, you were very wealthy because you were traders. You could buy and sell food. You could buy and sell donkeys. You could buy and sell anything you wanted. And do you know, Jericho was one of those cities that were right in the Via Marias, right on the edge. You could even set up a toll gate and collect people's taxes as they went through. And so you can see when the Philistines wanted... I wonder if I can go back one. Let's see if we can go back one. Okay, so see where the Philistines are. And I haven't got a pointer, so you're going to just imagine this. See where the Philistines are. The Via Marias, the way of the sea, from Egypt, which is way down here somewhere, all right, goes up through there, goes up through, and then cuts across the Jordan River, and then heads out way up here where the Tigris, where Babylon was, way over here. And so the Philistines were on part of the Via Marias, but they wanted more of it. They wanted to take over the whole lot. And so that was part of the reason why in the history of Israel, you've always got these fights with the Philistines. Now, the Philistines were a bit more advanced than some of the other tribes around the place because they had discovered how to make iron. And if you've got iron, that's a little bit better than using sticks to fight with, isn't it? But Israel now had a king. And they had a king that was going to bring them all together. And they had a king that was going to keep the Philistines out. And they were a king that was going to keep the Midianites out and the Amalekites out. So we have our first king. Long live the king. But uneasy is the head that wears a crown. And while the king has been appointed in Israel, he has no government structure. He has no palace. He has no parliament house. He doesn't even have a hall where he can bring everyone in to have a talk to them, to pass his judgment. So what does the new King Saul do? He goes home. And he goes out the back and he picks up the plough and does some more farming because that's what he'd always done. Here's the new king. It's interesting, isn't it? Anyone can say they're king, but if nobody else believes you, what's the point? It's like there was a young bloke, and every time he went through a door, he used to go like that. But he was only this high. And everyone thought, well, why is he doing that? And so they talked to him about it one day, and he says, I'd hit my head if I didn't duck. But you're only this high. No, I'm higher than that door. You see, if nobody else believes what you think about yourself, what's the point? And so here's Saul, anointed king, what's there to do? So he goes home to the farm again and starts ploughing paddocks and picking fruit. Because he didn't know what kings did. Well, there is an interesting story that comes along, because this guy here, who happened to be from this tribe way over on this side, see the Ammon there? Well, that's the Ammonites. That's it. Well done. Now, this guy here, he decided that he was going to conquer a few places and go to war with the Israelites. And my time is probably running out. But hey, this is such a good story, I can't stop. And so, the Ammonites who lived east of Jordan under the leadership of King Nahash had captured the tribes of Gad and Reuben. And the people from Gad, they had run away and they went to this place, see the little red dot just north called Jabesh Gilead? There. They'd all run to there. And there were 7,000 people who went from where King Nahash was capturing them, and they raced up to this town here. And they come inside and they said to the people, protect us, protect us. King Nahash is going to capture us. Now, King Nahash was not a nice guy. The Dead Sea Scrolls, when they discovered the Dead Sea Scrolls, they were looking through some of the documents there, and they found some information on this Ammonite king, King Nahash. And it states that he was extremely cruel, and he had the practice of either killing his captives or gouging out their right eye. Now, if you've got your right eye gone, you've only got your left eye, you really can't fight very well against anyone because all your distance measurements are gone. This was the way of subduing the people. And so King Nahash, let me show you a picture if I can. Here he is. He is. And 1 Samuel chapter 11, verse 1 to 2 talks about him. Then Nahash the Ammonite came up and encamped against Jabesh Gilead, and all the men of Jabesh said to Nahash, make a covenant with us. In other words, you're here with your army, do a deal, we surrender, do a deal with us. We don't want to fight you, we don't want to fight you. What's your deal? What's your deal in the surrender? And we will serve you. And Nahash the Ammonite answered, and this is what he said, this is what his deal was. On this condition will I make a covenant or a deal with you, that I may put out your right eyes and bring reproach upon all of Israel. Oh, that's pretty gruesome. So all of a sudden, the people in the town thought, maybe we won't do a deal with him. We're going to lose our eyes. And so they said to the king, and I'm going to speed this up a bit, they said to the king, can we have some time to think about this? And I didn't think there'd be a lot to think about, but anyway, they wanted the time to think. And the king said, I'll give you 7 days. Now, he had the place surrounded with his soldiers. They weren't going anywhere. But at night, they snuck out some messengers. And these messengers went out to all the areas of Israel asking for help. And it happened that one of those messengers turned up near Saul. And Saul, when he heard about this, was furious. He was really angry. And all of a sudden, we're told in Samuel, there's the verse there, Samuel 11, verse 6. Then the Spirit of God came upon Saul when he heard the news, and his anger was greatly aroused. He took a yoke of oxen, he cut them into pieces. This seems to be a bit of a trend, isn't it? And he sent a piece right throughout all of Israel. And he said to the people, if you don't come to war against this guy, this king, your oxen will finish up like these oxen, chopped up in pieces. And he said, whoever does not go out with Saul and Samuel to battle, now Samuel was going to go with him, they would end up without any oxen. reckon Samuel delivered a pretty clear message. Sorry, Saul delivered a pretty clear message. But I question the manner of his message. It sounds a bit more like the mafia than the children of Israel. You know, here's a piece of oxen, special delivery from Saul. If you don't come and join the army, your oxen are going to end up the same way. At any rate, it worked. And so Saul then went on. He gathered this army. And he went from Gibeah, where his home was. And by the time he got up to Bezek, up there where the arrow goes, by the time he got up to there, he had an army of 300,000 men. There was at least 300,000 who didn't want their oxes all chopped up. And so he then sent a message through to Jabesh, and he said, the messenger that went through said, "We will be there and you will be free before lunch tomorrow." Wow. Was that ever an answer to prayer? So they sent a message out to King Nahash and said, "We will give up tomorrow afternoon and become your servant, and you can do whatever you want with us." So the King Nahash says to his soldiers, "We've got them. They're coming out tomorrow afternoon. Relax, boys. Take it easy. Tomorrow afternoon, you can kill as many as you want." The Ammonites expected total surrender, so they were off guard. Saul, instructed by God, formed 3 companies of his 300,000, of 100,000 each. They came into the valley. They attacked the Ammonites. You have this massive war. The Ammonites are totally defeated, total victory, and the people of Jabesh are all free. You may recall that Samuel was appointed Saul as king. And you may recall we talked about that there's probably a good reason that there were plenty of people around the place who didn't really think he should have got the job. But 1 Samuel 10 verse 27 says this, "But some rebels said, 'How can this man save us?' So they despised him." But when you go on a bit further, it says, "For today the Lord has accomplished salvation in Israel," and everyone came to support Saul as their new king. Now Samuel captures the moment. And you saw on that map before where they went, that line went back down towards Jerusalem again. They went down there and they had a big ceremony, and Saul was appointed king. No, he was appointed king. He was recognised as king. Saul had position power, appointed and anointed by Samuel. Now he had personal power because all the leaders of the tribes and all the soldiers in the tribes saw him as their leader. And so when you've got positional power and personal power, you have a strong leader. Saul recognised God as being the one that conducted and carried out the victory. He was humbled. Saul and all his men greatly rejoiced. They felt they had a king, a good king. He was victorious and he recognised his king, God, Yahweh. And Saul reigned in Gibeah for 38 years. Friends, Jesus is our King. God the King has anointed him and set him on his holy hill. And we have greatly assented to the appointment of making him king in our lives. But sometimes our sense of loyalty and our sense of devotion wane a little bit, doesn't it? Insensibly, we sometimes drift from our endeavours to act always as his devoted subjects. Therefore, I think sometimes we need to renew our loyalty. We need to renew the kingdom. We need to reverently make him king again. I guess there's a sense in which we can consecrate ourselves really once to God, but we can renew our vows often. And remember, right at the start, we said one of the things I wanted to get out of this, no matter how dumb we do things sometimes, God is always there for us. And he will always bring us back. And just maybe the story of Saul, of how he went from the plough to the leader of 12, the confederacy of Israel. Help us to remind us how powerful our God is, and that we want to be part of his kingdom.